Welcome to Fearless Heart and Mind. I'm your host, Nora Oliver.
And I am Cat Blake. And today we are here to talk about a very serious topic. As many of you know, Nora and I actually help people navigate relationships and navigate mental health and physical health and what have you, because we want you to live your best life. But today we are talking about a very serious topic, and that is parental alienation. This is in light of the fact that April 25th is Parental Alienation Awareness Day. So I want to explain to you and to our viewers what parental alienation actually is. And what it is it's a strategy whereby one parent intentionally displays to the child unjustified negativity aimed at the other parent. This usually happens during the divorce process, and it is associated with parents who often suffer from borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. It was coined in 1985 by Richard Gardiner, and there's a lot of controversy with it because some people do not believe in parental alienation. They think that it's junk science. It is not recognized by the American Psych Association.
Right.
And then there's others who very much deem it as emotional abuse. So I will tell you, in my experience, because I specialize in working with folks who are going through high conflict divorce, I see this quite frequently. In fact, if you look at some of the symptoms of it, 1 out of 4 children will experience some form of parental alienation if their parents are going through a divorce. So that is quite a high number.
Absolutely.
And the reality is not many people know about it. So in fact, a couple weeks ago I posted on my Facebook, which is where a lot of people come to me looking for guests to come on my podcast to talk about parental alienation. And I must have immediately received 20 questions around, this is what I'm experiencing, this is my situation, is this parental alienation? And so it's not something that's really part of our society's conversation. It's really kept in the dark. It's very taboo, and we want to bring light to it and have people conversing about it so that more people are aware and knowledgeable and then know how to manage it if they're dealing with it in their own lives. Today we have a very special guest with us. I want to introduce Rich.
How are you?
Hi, Rich.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you for coming.
Sure, thanks for having me.
And Rich has experienced some parental alienation, and we're going to talk about his journey because I think he can give some knowledge and some support and tips to folks and those of you who are dealing with this yourselves. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Yeah. Can you talk maybe just a little bit about the beginning?
Your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been divorced for about 18 years now, and about halfway through that, I noticed that my children were starting to be alienated from me. It's actually something that I expected. My ex-wife was in a mental hospital for a few months, and her own doctor there warned me that this happened to most of his patients, or the spouses of their patients. And just very slowly, I noticed the kids were being withdrawn. I would pick them up. I'd pick up my son, for instance, at his mother's house. And before we even left the driveway, she would start texting him saying, "We miss you. This is what we're having for dinner," which would be his favorite thing. And by the way, his favorite thing was what was a family recipe. And I had asked my ex for a copy of that recipe, but no, because she wanted to be the only one that could provide that. Right. And you know, there were a lot of signs that this was going to happen, and that it was happening. But you know, I didn't want to fight back with more alienation, putting
Right.
them in the middle. I mean, my priority was protecting them and making sure that they weren't going to get more messed up than I knew that they already would be from this. So, you know, I consulted therapists, family therapists, parenting coordinators, and tried to figure out what the best things I could do would be. And basically everyone just said, you know, just shower the kids with love, do as much as you can. And, you know, it wasn't enough in that I lost contact with my kids. One day around my daughter's 14th birthday in Massachusetts at 14, a lot of judges allow children to make a decision as to where they're going to be. My daughter ended up, she came home from school. I went to drop her off at her mother's house just to pick up her overnight stuff. And when and then I said, why don't you do your homework over here? I went to drive my son to one of his activities, and I immediately got a call or a text from my daughter saying, I'm not coming back to your house, or I'm not coming over to your house again. And I thought maybe this was like a mistaken text for a friend or something. And I said, what's this all about? And she just said, it's over, I'm not coming back.
Wow.
And I called, and my ex's husband, we technically weren't divorced, but she was married bigamously. Whole other story.
You weren't divorced yet, and she was
Correct.
This was in the United States?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's actually very common. People just don't talk about it.
Wow.
Right.
In fact, one of my friends who lives 10 miles from me is going through the exact same thing.
Yes.
And
yeah.
yeah.
Wow. And this is the thing that I really want people to understand this, because this is not, oh, my kid heard me complain about my ex-husband or wife a few times in the past few years, right? This is a very systematic approach of eroding the relationship. And I think when I hear your story, one of the most painful aspects of it is that it's grieving for somebody, your children who are still there.
Right.
It's very hard to grieve for someone who's still alive. It's
Right.
called ambiguous loss. And it's kind of like what people who are going through who adopted children who have no sense of who their parents are. They don't know if they're alive or not. People whose spouses are lost at sea.
Right.
You're kind of living in limbo,
Right.
and it's very difficult to grieve.
bet.
It took me quite a long time to figure out how to make sense of the whole thing.
I
So
mean,
what
and
did
this
you-
is what I mean,
sorry,
because
like-
people don't know what it is. That's what they don't. So how would I think the problem with this? Like, I remember when I went through a custody battle in 2015 with my ex, and there was definitely a campaign of turning my daughter against me. And I remember meeting with the specialist because I was terrified that I was going to lose her. And the specialist said to me, well, she still likes you, so it hasn't worked yet. There's nothing you can do about it. And I felt so powerless with that. I was like, so you mean to tell me that there's nothing I can do therapeutically, any which way, unless my daughter's already alienated? And that to
Right.
me is so
And
sad. It
it's-
frustrates me that there's no clinical treatment plan for this situation. I mean, courts will often ask for a parent coordinator or reunification therapist. Those people are just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. There's no systemized approach to helping these children. And at the end of the day, these kids are being emotionally abused.
And it's a lot more common than we think. It's
Yes.
everywhere out there, and many of us may not even realize that it's happening to us.
Right.
And
Right.
As
there
soon
are-
as I started talking to friends about my story, all of a sudden everyone had the same story. It was just like the Me Too movement.
Right.
Nobody talks about
Right.
sexual abuse until one person does.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, you take power and let your story be known. I'm the victim here. Actually, my children
Yes.
are the victim.
Absolutely.
I am a victim, but I have, 55 years of experience on this planet, so I have the tools to handle this. I've got the support circles of friends that I built up over the years. I have access to therapists, and I know where to look and seek support. I know how to seek support. Children don't have these things.
Right.
And in fact, it was one of the most enlightening things for me. One day I was taking a hike in the woods and I was trying to make sense of all of this. My children were already 18 by this time. And I was thinking, why won't they just call me? They're adults now, but 18 doesn't mean you're an adult. It means
Right.
that you had 18 birthdays. That's all it means. And the more I thought about it and tried to put myself in their head, the more I realized that it was really the only choice that they had, because they understood that my love for them was unconditional, and their mother's love for them was conditional on them not expressing
Yes.
love for me.
Right.
And all of a sudden, it just felt like a weight was lifted, because I knew they had no other choice.
Right.
And they were in self-preservation mode, and they were doing what they had to do. And it didn't make it easier in the sense that I miss them any less. I still think about them all the time. I still, I avoid social media and a lot of things. I don't like getting holiday cards and seeing everyone's happy families, not because I'm a Grinch,
Right,
but because
It
it's just
reminds you,
hard.
right?
Exactly.
How was your
one-
relationship with
yeah.
your kids prior to divorce?
It was excellent.
So you had great bonding, there's no issues. How is it now after their, adult age?
I don't know. I mean, they're
So
gone.
there's no contact.
There's no
whatsoever.
contact. I'm not even sure if their phone numbers are actually their phone numbers. I know that the numbers are still active. There's still the voicemail from when my son was 4 or 5 years old. He never changed his voicemail. But for all I know, that phone might be in a drawer somewhere. I just don't know. I did bump into them. I'll still go to events and things, although that's harder now that my daughter's graduated college. My son is in college in Colorado. But I went to my daughter's graduation. I asked her mother for an invitation because it was, invite only. And I didn't hear back, of course. And it was at the Pavilion in Boston, so difficult to get into. But I reached out to my network, and someone was friends with the president of the college and got me into VIP seating, and I happened to be in the same row as my daughter, like the fourth row right across the aisle. So I'm pretty sure she saw me, even though she wouldn't make eye
But there
contact.
was no contact.
No,
Nothing.
no.
Wow,
I did.
that's heartbreaking.
Right. I noticed that her mother was sitting behind me and her grandmother. So I kind of walked between the entry and where they were sitting, knowing that my son was going to get to his seats. And I intercepted him on the way and gave him a hug. We spoke for a few minutes, but he was kind of just looking over my shoulder to make sure that his mother wasn't looking. So, he seemed happy to see me, but very nervous.
Yeah.
And it's
And
tough.
you think it has something to do with the mom being there?
We were very close until this. My daughter disappeared that day. I told you about 9 years ago this month. And my son, it took several years after that for him to disappear. He was 15. I'd taken him and his friends to the Boston Calling Festival. I got them all passes. They were able to hang out in the photo pit, and they had a great time. And that was the last time I saw him, or that I hung out with him.
I mean, that's really sad. How is your relationship with your ex-wife? Do you guys talk? Is there any communication at all?
No. If there's a bill, she might reach out. We have a divorce plan that specifies how everything's dealt. And basically, and I even heard her say this on FaceTime with the kids once, this is why we had to divorce your father. This is why we had to divorce your father.
Oh,
I really want
Yeah.
to go back because as many of you, I started my career as a child therapist because I think you bring up a good point. So these kids it's almost like a cult member, right?
It's exactly what it is.
And you bring up such a good point, and I try to remind my clients who are struggling with this. The kids are really angry that they're stuck in the middle at the end of the day. It's not about who's right or who's
lost
wrong.
too. Who do I trust, mom
Well,
or
the
dad?
problem is they're often going to unleash the anger around the situation towards the safe parent, towards the parent that is unconditional. And it's really challenging as the safe parent to not lash back, right? Because sometimes these kids can be downright mean and nasty and abusive. And the goal, and which I think is so hard, is to be able to bite your tongue, not argue with them, not try to change their mind, because often they've bought into these false narratives that the abuser has instilled in them. And if you start challenging that, and that's not right, that's not how it happened, that's not true, I'm not really that kind of person, it actually alienates the child further. Because when you're trying to do that, it's almost like pulling somebody's identity off of them, and they have nowhere to go.
Oh, absolutely.
So
I can see that.
love Rich's healing story because, and even if you want to dig into that a little bit more, you and I talk a lot about mindset, but the way what you have done to heal is so powerful and incredible and takes such strength.
It took
And
a while. In the beginning, I focused on distraction, which is what everybody does. I ended up going to a concert. I had my camera, And I started taking pictures and realized this is really putting me in another space. It's I'm able to be present. So I ended up becoming a concert photographer, just figuring out how to do that. And so now I go to a lot of concerts, and it
That's
built
great.
up, all these things just happen to work out really well for me. It built up several networks of friends, the musicians, the other photographers, the fans that were always in the front row. And I would talk to these people. I could do this alone because people found it interesting. I had a
Right.
camera. What's that all about? Who are you taking pictures for?
But you've also chosen some really healthy
Exactly.
coping strategies.
It took
like
me a while.
lot of people, will. I mean, I'll admit, when I was going through my challenges, I was definitely drinking too much wine. I was pretty isolated from friends. I mean, you took a really healthy, amazing path.
I kept pretty quiet about the alienation because people just couldn't understand.
Right.
And the more you tell someone an outlandish story, the
Right.
more you sound like you're the mentally ill
Exactly.
one. So
Right.
I was always very careful about talking too much about it. And it's uncomfortable. I would start talking, people would get very uncomfortable, and I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable.
Well, it is uncomfortable. I mean, you raised these
It is.
children for so many years, and now all of a sudden, after all that work and energy and making sure that they become these amazing human beings, that's taken away. I mean,
Yeah.
you kind of crash as a person. How are you supposed to function?
Exactly. So I started out with the distraction, and then after a while I realized this isn't serving me. I started speaking more about it. It was about 5 years ago. I posted something on my Facebook page on Alienation Day, I think. Yeah, it must have been, which is April 25th, about the story. And so I did it before my birthday, and then 6 months later on my birthday, I decided to make that post public. And all of my other posts are private. And it was very empowering. All of a sudden, I just felt like I don't have to hide this. I didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
It's interesting because I would go to back to school night, which was one of the most difficult things to do as a parent. Some of the teachers would say, "Oh, I'm surprised to see you here," because they wouldn't say it right then, but once we were talking afterwards, they said, I was told that you weren't interested in the children and weren't
wow.
part of their life.
So it went outside the
Yeah.
kids'
Yeah.
space. Wow.
And interestingly enough, at back to school night, my ex, who we always kept a very large distance between us, I would never see her anywhere, and she would just kind of disappear, was never around me. However, at back to school night, she would sit right next to me, which I thought was the most bizarre thing ever.
Yeah.
And it didn't occur to me until someone said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see that you and Pam are talking and blah, blah, blah." And it was basically just making me, it was jeopardizing my narrative, which is the
Right.
truth, because I wanted nothing to do with her. And I was telling people that she wanted nothing to do with me. And then they see something that conflicts with that. And I'm the one that would be deemed untrustworthy.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, and the sad part about this, and I think we had spoken, the research shows that 6 years post-divorce, these people are still engaging in alienating behavior. It just doesn't stop.
Yeah, I mean, that's unfortunate. And I remember, I have a little bit of a story on this as well. As I was going through divorce, I remember my ex, making plans with my children. I'm going to take you to Disney World. I'm going to do all these things. And then going back to them and saying, "Oh, well, Mom says no, so you have to talk to Mom. She's not letting you go." And it makes, you as a parent look bad. But if that
Yep.
continuously happens, I remember talking to my attorney, and my attorney telling me there's really nothing that you can do.
That's the
you
hard
can't
part. Yep.
stop the other person from
Right. And a
saying
lot of
all these
times
things and
they
getting
don't
on the
just
kids'
say this
heads
stuff.
and-
They get into the kids' heads
Yeah.
and get them to think it's their idea.
Right.
Yep.
Well, I noticed on my kids, they would get confused, and I could see them being a lot more anxious. And you can tell. I mean, your kids
Yep.
more than anybody else in this world, and you know when something is off. So I could sense that they were getting more anxious. Whenever Dad was about to come and see them, they would get more anxious. And it made it suspicious. Like, why are they feeling this way? They should feel
Right.
excited. And, motivated to want to go, but then I found out all these signs that these things were happening, and there was no way to stop it. The courts don't do anything about it. There's
Right.
nothing that an attorney can do about it. So it was all up to me. What do I do about it?
This is where I think if you could talk a little bit about the sense of control. There's so much of life that we don't
Yeah.
have control over, and I think, yeah, I mean, the court system is a black and white system. People don't realize that doesn't account for nuances. So they will definitely address abuse that is documented. It's black and white. There's police reports, but emotional abuse,
How
narcissistic
do
abuse,
you
financial
prove that?
abuse,
Right.
parental alienation. And that's what I mean. A lot of it depends on the judge. Some judges will get in the weeds and they will say, this is emotional abuse, I want to protect the kids. A lot of judges say, you know what, that's junk science, I don't even want to hear about it.
And that's only if it gets to trial.
Right.
And they never go to trial,
Right.
divorces, or very
Exactly.
rarely. And, a judge is there to make a ruling on a motion that's presented before them. That's it. The
Yep.
motion isn't, there's no emotion. It's all about what I'm alleging, and it's not just saying, oh, this person's bad, they did this, I should get this. It's really, these are the things that we want. I want, custody of this percent of the time, this much child support, blah, blah. It's all very spelled out. And you also have much less time than we've already been speaking so far. You have about 3 or
Right.
4 minutes in front of a judge.
So true.
Absolutely, it is quick.
I've spent more
Usually,
time
you're
in
lucky
front
if you
of-
get 3 or 4 minutes. I've
Yeah.
been there.
Right.
So
It's like fighting a parking ticket. I've spent more time doing that than each of
Right.
these court appearances.
So, with your experience, obviously, with all of this, it sounds very traumatic and just not fun for you to go through and lose your kids. Basically, that's what it feels like. What is that one thing that you could say to someone, to others that may be facing this, that might possibly help them? What direction could they take?
I would just say take care of yourself. Look inward, figure out what is serving you, what's not serving you, and reach out to your friends and talk to them.
Support.
When we were, or when our parents were kids, people didn't talk about cancer. If someone was sick, it was just silent. You wouldn't even use the word cancer. And that's pretty much how it is with divorce and alienation. I would say just talk about it. The more I talk about it to people who know my ex even, the more legitimate my story becomes, the more aware they are of these things, the more likely they are to stop these things when they happen. And it's so subtle. I'd say, be very aware of all of the cues.
Early on, right?
Yes.
Don't wait months or years.
Right,
because
and I
at that
waited
point,
too
It's
long.
a bit too late, right? You can't
Right.
really step up.
I was aware, I wasn't sure what to do, but I could tell that, instead of my kids saying, I had tickets to take them to St. Martin on April vacation one year, or February vacation, and a week before, they decided not to go. And it wasn't my ex who said, don't go. She said, do you feel safe leaving the country with Dad?
Oh,
Things
wow.
like
Yeah.
that. It
of
was
course, that would get in their head.
right. Friends of my son were going to come to our house. You're not embarrassed to have them over to Dad's house because it wasn't as nice as their mom's house? Just things like that. And it gets them thinking. And these are the strategies that people with personality disorders will employ to put this on the children and not them. So they can say to a judge, I didn't do this, I didn't say anything, and it's the kids. And even the kids will say, yeah, I don't feel this or that. I remember my daughter, I asked the parenting coordinator, what do? I need to pick up my daughter from school. I have my daughter, and she's saying, actually she was supposed to take the bus home to my house, and she's saying that I'm going to go to Mom's. The parenting coordinator said, just go to school, intercept her, call the principal, tell him what's going on, get a guidance counselor there. And we did. We had a meeting. very last minute. The school knew what was going on. I kept them in the loop all along. And I show up, my daughter's there and she's trembling. And it was just so uncomfortable. And they said, well, why don't you want to go to Dad's house? And she said, I don't feel safe or secure there.
Oh,
and
wow. I mean, that's
yeah, 14-year-old.
heartbreaking again.
Right.
And they said, well, okay, so you don't feel safe. What do you mean by secure? She didn't know. You know,
Wow.
she's like, well, I just don't feel safe or secure. She just kept repeating it. It was a mantra that
Right.
she had. And when I saw it was going nowhere, I said, I'm just going to let her go to her mom's house because this is not.
Well, that's emotional abuse. So
Yeah.
what steps do you take if you are, you at that in your position? You know your kids are going through this. You know this is not healthy for your children. So how do you step in and intervene and stop that? So I mean, my recommendation is to honestly file a motion with the court if you're already divorced or if you're going through divorce. Always document every day whatever it is happening.
A motion
If-
against who, though? Because my ex
emotional
wasn't.
abuse.
But she wasn't in contempt of anything. You can't prove these things. And it was just wasting everyone's time, wasting money. We spent, between the two of us, we spend 7 figures on
Oh,
our,
wow. I mean,
on
that's
just
incredible.
lawyers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think going back to the piece of self-care, it's not trying to pull your child out of the cult, so to speak. I do encourage my parents to keep reaching out no matter what, even if it's for their own heart.
Absolutely.
And that's
so
what
you
I
show
do.
That you tried.
I text, every now and then, can send some money by Venmo because I assume that I can't be blocked on that. I will do what I can. I'll use a burner number and send a text on their birthday or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
You do what you can. And
Absolutely.
I know that most of the time it's just for me, not
Yeah.
for them.
So I want to encourage viewers, if you are experiencing this, don't feel that you need to go through this alone. There are supports out there. I highly recommend, there's a YouTube series from Dr. Sue Kornbluth that you can watch. She actually gives tips on helping parents on how to communicate with their children in the beginning stages of parental alienation. There's an amazing documentary called Erase by Ginger Gentile that's full of education and gives you a clear sense of such a complex, I mean, we could talk about this for hours and hours, but I want you to know, I guess anybody who is dealing with this, come out, get help, don't isolate, don't go down a dark path, and
Don't stay quiet. Do something about
yes.
it.
And there are a lot of Facebook support groups
Yeah,
also
absolutely.
if you type in
Yeah.
parental alienation.
Absolutely.
Thank you
But
so
Rich,
much.
thank you so much
Yeah,
for being
thank
here
you
and
for
telling your
sharing.
story. I really appreciate
for
it.
listening.
I'm so happy to see that you're doing well, and I hope you get in contact with your children. So anybody
Thanks.
else that's watching out there, thank you so much. And if you feel like you're stuck and unsure what to do, like Kat said, find a support system, whether it's a group on Facebook or YouTube or anywhere around you. Just seek some sort of help. Don't just sit still. Thank you for watching Fearless Heart and Mind, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.